Hi guys, we're going to start your second set of notes for topic 8. This is actually going to be where you are going to solve the equations. We're going to only start off with just simple equations first, and by simple equations it just means that we're solving one-step equations. Okay, so first let's go over the definitions of an equation and a solution first, so then you can be able to move forward with the rules. Okay, with the definitions, if you want to talk about the definition of an equation, it's a mathematical sentence that contains an equal sign. So that is the difference between an equation and an expression, is that there will be an equal sign in an equation, and in an expression, you will not see an equal sign. For a solution, it's the value for a variable that makes the equation true. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the rules and what those mean and how we're going to solve these equations. Okay, so number one, when solving an equation, your goal is to always get the variable alone. And that's an R, variable, alone, by itself or on one side of the equation. When you're trying to get the variable alone and you're solving for a variable, you must use inverse operations, okay, or opposite operations, okay? And that is how you're going to isolate the variable or get the variable by itself or alone, okay? Whatever you do to one side of the equation, you must do to the other side. And that's why there's an equal sign, because whatever is on one side, that's equal or equivalent to or the same value as the other side of the equal sign, okay? So whatever you do to one side, you must do to the other side. It's like a balance in science, however much weight you put on one side, you'll see that the balance goes uneven, but as soon as you put the same amount of weight on the other side, then they both become balanced and they're equal. And that's how it should be. You're going to be thinking to solve equations as undoing what has already been done. And I'll show you what I mean by that here in a second. So you're undoing what has already been done or working backwards, doing the opposite in order to get the variable isolated or by itself. Okay? With that being said, your inverse operations or your opposite operations, we're just going to review those really quick. Hopefully you already know those. The inverse operation or opposite operation for multiplying is dividing. And sometimes that means you'll divide fractions. Sometimes that means you'll divide whole numbers. Sometimes that means you'll divide negative numbers. But same thing with all of these. Sometimes that means the inverse operation of dividing is multiplying, and you'll have to multiply all of those types of numbers. The inverse operation of adding is subtracting, and then obviously the opposite of subtracting is adding. Okay, so let's go ahead and practice, and then we will also check our answer after we solve the equation. Okay, so we'll start with the first one here. It says 4y is equal to negative 96. Now, whenever I'm solving an equation, I always draw a line down my equal sign, because remember, whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other to make sure that it stays balanced. Okay, so y is my variable in this case, and the y is being multiplied by 4. Whenever a number and a variable are right next to each other, it's being multiplied. So the opposite of multiplying by 4 is to divide by 4. So we usually write it as a fraction when we're showing division. So since I'm dividing by 4 on one side, I'm going to divide by 4 on the other side. Okay, 4 over 4, or multiplying by 4 and dividing by 4, create 1. And 1 times y is just y, which is what we want. We only want one value for y, so we can figure out what the y value is. Okay. Then I have to figure out what negative 96 divided by 4 is. We learned about this in topic 5 and 6. Actually, just topic 5. A bad thing happening to a good person, because we're dividing. So negative 96 divided by a positive 4 tells me that it's going to be a negative. Okay. And then if you want, you can do your long division to figure out how many times 4 can go into 96, but your answer will be 24. So the value for y is equal to negative 24, and you can double check by plugging it in to figure out if you have the correct value. So by plugging it in, since we know that y is equal to negative 24, I can go back into the original problem, which was y equals negative 96. 4y equals negative 96. And instead of having that y there, now I can actually plug in negative 24. So 4 times negative 24 needs to equal negative 96. So then if I go ahead and multiply that out, I then get negative 96 is equal to negative 96, which is a true statement. So this is all true. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to number 2. Okay, I'll even do it in a different color so that you guys can see it. Okay, number 2, my very first thing I do is to always draw my line down my equal sign. Okay, that way whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Okay, currently M is on the right side this time, and what's being done to M is what I have to undo. So M has plus 45. The opposite of adding 45 would be to subtract 45. So I'm going to subtract 45 on both sides because I have to make it even. Okay, adding 45 and taking away 45 cancel each other out and create a 0, or those are additive inverses. They're adding opposites, which create 0, leaving us with just M on this side. So M will be equal to whatever our value is on the left side. Now you learned in topic 4 how to solve this. So we have positive 18, take away positive 45. So if you want, you can even rewrite this as 18 take away 45, or we've also practiced switching it to an addition problem, which would be 18 plus negative 45. Since they have different signs, that means that we have to subtract. When we subtract that, we get 27. 45 minus 18 gives you 27. The negative value is bigger, so my answer is negative 27. Remember, you always take the value of the bigger number whenever you have to add or subtract. So now we know that M is equal to negative 27. So if we plug it in just to double check, we have 18 is equal to, instead of M, I'm going to put negative 27 plus 45. So then when I go to solve this, 18 is still on this side. And then I know over here on the right-hand side, they have different signs, which means I have to subtract. So 45 minus 27 gives me 18. And this time the positive is bigger. 18 is equal to 18. So that means that negative 27 was the correct answer. So M is equal to negative 27. Okay, I'm going to go down to number 3. Number 3 this time has a fraction. Okay. So I'm now going to solve it for the fraction. Draw my line down my equal sign. Okay. When a number and a variable are right next to each other, it's multiplying. The opposite of multiplying is to divide. So I'm going to divide by 1/2 on both sides of the equation. With that being said, 1/2 divided by 1/2 gives you 1, and you're just left with 1x, which is exactly what we want. We want the value of 1x. So this will cancel. I just get x is equal to, and now I have to solve 7 over 8 divided by 1/2. Now, to solve dividing by fractions, you have to multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal of 1/2 is 2 over 1. So I'm going to do keep, change, and there's my 2 over 1, which is flip. Then when I solve this, I could cancel early. I know that 2 can go into both 2 and 8, or if you don't cancel early, that's fine. You get 14 over 8, and 14 over 8 needs to be simplified by 2, and that's where you're going to get 7 over 4. So x is equal to 7 over 4. And I can double check my answer by plugging it in. So my original equation was 1/2 times x, but now we said x is 7 over 4 is equal to 7 over 8. And if I do that, top times top is 7, and 2 times 4, bottom times bottom is 8. So I know that that's true, and that means that 7 over 4 is the correct value for x. Okay, number 4. Let's go ahead and use orange. Okay, I'm going to draw my line down my equal sign. I have to isolate the variable, get the variable by itself. So I have w minus 112.3 is equal to negative 50.45. So the opposite of subtracting by 112.3 would be to add 112.3 on both sides. 112.3. Okay. So that means that this is additive inverse, which create a 0, and I have w by itself, which is exactly what we want. Now, if I look over on my right-hand side, they have different signs. One's a negative and one's a positive. Okay, that means I have to subtract because they have different signs, and I take the sign of the bigger number. When I subtract, remember to line up your decimals. Okay, so I'm going to subtract those two. I have to borrow. I have to borrow again. And now I don't have to borrow. I have to borrow again. So then my answer is 61.85. Now it is a positive 61.85 because my bigger number was positive. Okay, and then if you plug that in, you'll get the correct value also. So W is equal to 61.85. Okay, last one. I'm going to scoot it up here, clear it out, and we'll go back to this blue. Okay, it says a submarine sat at X feet below sea level. So there's my X. It then descended 43 feet lower. So descending means to go down, which means I'm going to subtract 43. If its final position, that means its total or its final position or equal to, was negative 125.75 feet, where did the submarine start? So that means I need to figure out the value of X. So here's my equation. I wrote down my equation and now I'm going to solve it. Okay, to solve it, I always draw my line down my equal sign because whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So X is being subtracted by 43. The opposite of subtracting by 43 is to add 43 on both sides. So I'm going to put plus 43 on both sides. Okay. With that being said, additive inverses create a 0, which is exactly what we want because we want the X by itself. Then if you look over here, we have different signs. So since they're different signs, we have to subtract those values. We have 5, 7.2, and then I have to borrow an 8. And then you take the sign of the bigger number. And in this case, the bigger number is a negative. Okay, so then X is equal to, my starting position would be negative 82.75, or you would say 82.75 feet below the surface, or below sea level. You can double check your answer. So if I double check negative 82.75 minus 43, or you can even rewrite it as negative 82.75 plus negative 43. Since they have the same sign, you would add them together, and they both equal negative 125.75, which is exactly what we wanted. So this X value is correct. Okay. Hopefully you got all your notes. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask your teacher, and then we will start on the activity.